Welcome to session 7. This is all about first-person interpretation, and this session went pretty long, so we had to divide it in two. So here's the first half of session 7. Welcome to session 7 of the Getting Started series. This episode is on building the inner person. I'm John Townsend.
Kevin Carter. Yes. Hi, John. Way over there.
Yes.
We have a studio audience today.
Yeah.
Actually, we'll introduce them in just a minute. So
This topic, this building the inner person, we're going to get very deep on this particular topic, and it's not for everyone, especially if you're just getting started. But I really wanted to give you this taste of how deep and how rich reenacting can be.
Today we have the privilege of having John and Carol Jarboe with us, a.k.a. Parson John and Maggie. We met them at Martin Station earlier this year and just fell in love with these people. They're incredible people and extremely talented first-person historic interpreters.
So as we get in here, let me just throw this out. And I touched on it at the very beginning about this topic not being for everyone. There is this continuum of reenacting. People get started. Sometimes people are just 21st century people in 18th century clothes.
In living history circles, we call the people who dress out and fill out the event eye candy. In fact, we joke about that sometimes, that the only reason we're there is to be eye candy. But the eye candy is what draws the public in, and they are the ones who fill it out and make it taste as good as it does. So that's a very important part, and would be very empty if all we were doing was relying on first-person characters.
Right. This isn't something that everybody has to do. It's
or that anybody wants to do, and it's okay if you don't want to do this.
Even if you are eye candy, you need to have some of that inner person to think about as you're doing it, even to the extent of trying to not be an obvious 21st century person, even if you're an extra.
Oh, that's a great costume there, John. Let me take your picture.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, we recently watched this very stirring battle reenactment, and one of the casualties out on his field pulls out his iPhone, and you can hear all the snickers in the crowd. And
yeah, why did they do that?
I'm not sure.
You're going to go to all that trouble to recreate something, follow it through to the end.
Yeah.
But that's taking the position that you've chosen to be. If you're going to be eye candy, you're good eye candy.
Yes.
You should try to. But if you want a speaking part, then you start developing how am I going to interact with the public, and that is an incremental thing.
Small steps, easy to walk forward, little steps at a time.
You know, I think it might be good if we take just a minute, and I'm kind of getting off our outline here a little bit, but in the way of introductions. We mentioned your names. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, maybe the personas that you are portraying currently, and maybe some of the other personas? You have multiple personas, and just help the viewing audience here, the participants in this course, to understand who you are and maybe why you're here. Well, we by the end of the session, it'll be clear why you're here. Okay. But
take it, Maggie.
Well, I do 2 different characters, and within the one character, she actually branches into 3. The first character that I began to do was called Maggie Delaney, is what I named her. She's an Irish indentured servant. I did that because I wanted to be able to bring the indentured servant out to the public eye and let them see what a lot of our ancestors did to be able to get over here. Because I'm Irish in my background, that's the reason I went to that country and chose that. But in developing her, I found that she needed something to do at events other than walking around and going, "Hi, I'm Maggie the indentured servant." And so I went into the ship's records to see what Irish women were sold for. They were sold as seamstresses and laundresses. And so I thought, well, I'll do laundry. That's something that I don't see out very often. I thought I'd get a scrub board and a brush and I'd be good. I found out that it was a whole lot more technical than that. So now I am also Maggie the laundress. Because it's a very large demonstration that I do. So I had to learn that aspect of it. And just recently, she has moved into her freedom, and I have become a resurrectionist, which is how I met you gentlemen. And that would be in the medical supply business. I'm providing cadavers for the doctors of the period of the time to be able to practice their anatomy on. So those are the three things that Maggie does in three different sections of her life. And then in order to move into the 1812 time period, I also picked up a British baroness who is a dowager. She's a widow. And so I portray this older woman who is a widowed Briton. It gives me a wonderful time to be able to talk about you barbarian people that are over here. And be able to show a little from that side. And I talk a lot about manners and customs of the period of time, because class is something we don't understand here at all. So I bring that over here and try to teach the people who come into my pavilion. So I do Maggie, and then I do Lady Caroline. Are the two different ones that I do.
What's interesting here is that the student often surpasses the teacher. I had studied for about 20 years religion on the frontier. We live about 15 miles from the beginning of the Second Great Awakening there in southern Kentucky, Logan County, Kentucky. And so I was very interested in that. I developed a website for the Red River Meeting House in spite of the fact that I'd never been there. Finally, we were able to go, and I reluctantly drug my wife, kicking and screaming, to a reenactment. She thought these people were crazy.
Strange people.
Strange people
that dress up like this.
And I thought this would be an interesting thing that I could go into churches and talk about the great revivals, the First and Second Great Awakenings. And so I thought, well, I'll do this in some type of period dress. So I went out and bought some of the wrong clothing and things that many of us are wont to do. But I found as we went to the reenactments that we knew exactly what kind of buttons would have been on our coats and the guns that we had and the knives that we had, but there wasn't a lot that I could see visible or hear about what was in a person's head and what was in a person's heart. Mm. So the idea of an itinerant 18th century minister became a very enticing thing. And so that's how we developed Parson John. My middle name is Frank, and that's what I go by, being a good Southern boy. But Parson Frank didn't sound nearly as cool as Parson John, which is my first name.
No, Parson. I'm going to call you that,
yes,
right?
Yes, you may call me Parson.
Okay. Now, you're not dressed in 18th century, are you?
I am not. I am dressed. Well, the coat is technically 1790, but I'm dressed more for the 1812, the Regency period, because we have an event coming up next weekend, for which I have shaved somewhat appropriately, and thought the sideburns would not go well with the Rev War look, so I opted to come in as my son, Reverend Griswold.
Okay, all right. So actually a different persona.
So I do have this. I have Parson John, the owner of Maggie, okay, and then I have Reverend Griswold, who is the brother-in-law of Lady Caroline. Okay. One reenactor questioned me just a few weeks ago and said, "What is Reverend Griswold's view on slavery?" And so I gave him what would be my view, which would be very, very anti. I would be right there with John Newton and William Wilberforce in opposing the slave trade in England, looking for the end of slavery. But then I said, but Parson John might have a slightly different view, since he obviously owns an Irish indentured servant. So here's where there's a difference between the two personas. Both of them are ministers. Both of them preach at events, but this is a difference.
Let's help the viewers understand, when we talk about the inner person, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So what's the definition of the inner person? Is that what we're looking for? And that is, obviously, from the outer person, that's what we're wearing, right? But all of a sudden, a person is more than just what they are on the outside. That is what they are on the inside. What are they thinking about? How do they react to the world around them? How do they view the world around them? And how do they view themselves within it? And everything that happens in the world, that we see, we have to react to, internally. We have to, digest that. And the way we digest that is our sort of the glasses we look through the world with, our worldview and some other similar things. That's what your inner person is. And we cannot assume that people in the 18th century or any other time period think the way we do. And that is a very big challenge for us to even, and when we do that, we also have to think, we have to start off before we even go into the 18th century mindset to understand what our mindset is. What is my worldview? And especially against someone standing beside me or someone around, on the other side of the world. I see things that happen and I know it's happening for a certain reason, or it doesn't happen for a certain reason, depending on my internal views. And, I do things expecting the world to react to me in a certain particular way. I work and I want to get money or whatever that is. All those have to do with my inner person. And we have our inner person, and then if we want to portray someone in the 18th century, we have to come up with their inner person. We're not going to do a very good job of it. I can almost guarantee you we will never be able to get close to it, but we can at least try to conceive it.
Right. I'm fascinated by the realization that my worldview is even different from my children's worldview. Generationally, worldviews can change, let alone a span of 200-300 years.
Imagine the amount of change there is each generation.
Mm-hmm. One thing that it was very helpful for me, and I think I could speak to Maggie also, when we first started developing a persona, I looked at creating something out of whole cloth, just out of thin air. Here's who I'm going to be, and that's one thing that is very possible to do. Maggie Delaney is a created person out of historical research, but I started looking with Lady Caroline, Reverend. I thought I would choose a name. I thought the name Dankworth sounds like a name of a very stern minister. And so then I went looking for where would Reverend Dankworth have come from, and I started to get bogged down. And I thought, why am I doing this? I've got a family history. The Griswold family is my family. The Jarboe family is my family. Mm-hmm. So when I'm Parson John, I'm a descendant of Lieutenant Colonel John Jarboe that came to Maryland in 1640. When I'm Reverend Griswold, I am a descendant of the Griswold brothers that came over in the early 1600s to the Massachusetts area. Oh. So now I'm developing my worldview based on their worldview. A very wise reenactor told us when we first got started in this that if you want to know who you are in the 18th century, determine who your grandparents were and what side they would have taken in the English Civil War. So I can extrapolate from what I know of the Griswolds, what I know of my great-great-great-grandparents on both sides of my family, and then I can bring that into developing the worldview for Parson John or Reverend Griswold.
Well, we ran across. John and I were sitting in the office yesterday. We were trying to figure out, okay, how do we describe worldview? We found this definition that seems to fit. A worldview is the theory of a theory of the world used for living in the world. Worldview is a mental model of reality, a framework of ideas and attitudes about the world, ourselves, and life, a comprehensive system of beliefs with answers for a wide range of questions. That is like way up here in that type of thinking. But we identified, and I don't know, in this discussion here around this table, we might even identify more, but we identified several, I think 9 potential influences. But it's more than that. It's more than just external influences that mold a person's worldview. It's who they are as a person. Those external forces can mold us into who we are and how we think and how we react to the world. Parson, religion.
Sure.
Was a huge factor in the 18th century.
Absolutely. And that's one of the dividing points between worldviews, which there are a finite number of worldviews. And religion and philosophy are two of the things that are going to separate those. Mm-hmm. So do I want to be an 18th century evangelical, or do I want to be an 18th century pagan? I want to then see what are the worldviews that are going to be with that time frame, the chosen worldview of my persona. And of course, where I am now, I'm a 21st century evangelical, but I have to take those 21st century glasses off and put on the 18th century glasses to see the nuances of how my character is going to respond. It's going to be different on some things. Terminology, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. In addition to religion, politics, socioeconomics, Maggie.
Yes. I had to go into that time period and the culture that I was bringing this character out of and see how that group of people felt about the world around him. How much did they know? And how did they feel about what was happening around them? And they hated the British pretty badly. I had to see and do a lot of research on how the world looked at us and how we looked at the world around us by going back into what was happening in the country at that period of time, and in particular in the area that I wanted Maggie to be from. And where Maggie is from had a different view than just across the border. Those people felt completely different because they were part of the British rule. Where I'm from, I was not. So that changed things. That was a totally different pair of glasses for me because I never had thought about how I would feel about the people around me. You know, they were just part of the world, but no, there were some very hard feelings that were going on at that period of time. So that's a little bit of difference, I think, that we're not used to having to do that, because what we think in 21st century about the world and our neighbors and the people across the sea is a totally different thing if you start over there and come this direction.
And that's politics. What about the socioeconomics? What about the rich versus poor?
Right.
I mean, you get all these nuances. It's like, well, an Irish poor person, an Irish rich person, they're going to have completely different views.
That's exactly right. And what I think about those people being poor, and again, if I jump to Lady Caroline, being from Britain, I have a very strong opinion about you rebellious children over here. You know, because that was from the time period, that's the way she felt. So for me to engage my own countrymen as Lady Caroline sometimes is a challenge to think about how would she view that battle, or how would she have thought about that type of thing. But again, you've got to look at the politics at the time and how that person would have come out of that part of the country and think about those kind of things. Even north to south. You know, where are you in the colonies, and how are you going to feel? And are you in the expansion, and how are you going to feel about this? That's something that's very important, to lay your culture down and to be able to build a view off of that.
We have down here occupation, and I think there's an interesting little, I don't know, juxtaposition here. You are a parson.
Yes.
You're a slave owner.
Yes.
Or an owner of an indentured servant.
Yes.
Owning a slave in the 18th century would have been very similar to owning a car today.
Because I portray this as Parson John doesn't mean that this is the way Frank Jarboe feels. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is a point in history that we want to educate about. And so I can't sugarcoat things. I can to a point. I don't want to be crass, but I can't hide what happened. It doesn't mean that I condone it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I even in part agree with it. Mm-hmm. But this is something that if we don't teach our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And so I feel like this is where we're coming from.
we can't just do the very, best things out of history and leave behind all the horrible things and or the bad things.
Right.
We have to talk about it all.
There are ministers in our history that I want to portray a good minister, but there are ministers in our history that were real scoundrels, and I don't want to hide that. I want to be able for people to see a true representation of what was going on.
Another influence on worldview is science, and we've talked in previous sessions about how Diderot's encyclopedia is one of those go-to resources that we're always referring to in our research. Very interesting. It gives us kind of an insight into technology of the day. A lot of the narrative that we've read, the period reference materials give us insight into the scientific. We receive comments on YouTube where people consider people of the 18th century less intelligent.
Oh, no. No.
That strikes me as they may have had less information.
Right.
But in fact, I am fascinated by how we do all these cooking videos and how people came up with these systems that worked, not knowing why they worked, but they worked.
Medications, for one, is fascinating, and some of the remedies that we think, well, that was horrible, but it produced an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it was a short-lived effect, and sometimes it was a fatal effect. But it did, and so they repeated it. But they didn't stay where they were. They refined things. Look at the craftsmanship. One thing we get to events, and everybody wants to make things look crude and rough. And in our books, we carry old, faded, worn-out books. Well, those books were new when they were produced. Many of the things Maggie uses in her laundry.
I was going to say, my laundry demonstration is all science. It is. It's not just lye, soap, and water. What they used for stain removers, for whitening agents, for starch is phenomenal. Now, today, with our chemistry background, we can go, oh, well, that's because it had such and such in it.
Easy to explain.
Yeah, easy to explain. How did they figure that out? Trial and error. But the things that they used was just phenomenal. Phenomenal.
What about philosophy? And it's actually very connected with science, and all these sort of philosophy sits kind of above some of these things. But yes, the philosophies that have come and gone since the 18th century. I mean, this was the age of Enlightenment, and then we have all this rationalism that's coming in the late 18th century, and we take all that for granted. And then we've even passed beyond that with modernism and postmodernism. We're a long way away from where they were at philosophically.
Atheism, as an example, was not in existence until shortly before the 18th century. Around in the 1500s, late 1500s, we see atheism come forward. But prior to that, it doesn't exist. So here's something where we want to step into an 18th century mindset. We have our postmodern thought that we really have to become agnostic to, and put it away. It doesn't. I don't care. Yes, I care what you think about the 21st century, but don't transpose that backwards into a time that those thoughts would not have existed.
We have down here the environment. What were you thinking when you wrote down environment?
I was struck with some of the stories that I heard at Martin Station. Here you have a group of people trying to, for whatever reason, settle a land. Some people were trying to escape this impending invasion of the British from the south. Other people were trying to find freedom for themselves, and they thought they could find that westward. but then you had this whole other side of the coin with the intrusion of Europeans on the First Nations people, and you have this environment that all of that tension, conflict, relationship is wrapped up in. You have people who are not only having to worry about hostility from whatever direction, human hostility, but they had to keep an eye out for a bear that might be around the corner.
Right.
Or they had, when they found a place to settle, they had to establish their priorities for survival's sake. What was it that they had to do first to survive on this plot of land?
Yeah, we don't think about that.
No.
Very much. I mean, even if we're in a situation that has a more harsh environment that, say, than we have, California. It's a desert. But we've kind of made our little environment already. You can move there and you don't have to worry about all these things. There's electricity and the water comes in.
And even in the 18th century, how would someone out on the frontier, how would their view of the world and how they interacted with the world differ from someone who lived in Philadelphia?
Right. The people that moved out to the frontier, what did that represent to them? I always think about that. What was the risk that they took, but what was the goal at the end that they were searching for, as opposed to the people who stayed in the cities and didn't come this direction. So what was it that drove them on? What were they dreaming for, hoping for, willing to risk things for? Into that kind of environment, they had to know what they were going into. So what was the goal there for them? What was it that was drawing them so hard? Was it just something in themselves? Was it part of their philosophy? Was it the land? What was it that pulled them out there to be able to risk leaving the fairly safe environment and coming out to a much more dangerous environment? I've always wondered what that was in them that drove them out.
Well, we know from Maggie what it was that drove them to the west
was land.
Was a promise of land.
Because they didn't have any. From where I came from in Ireland, we did not own our land.
No possibility.
No possibility of owning land. It was all owned by the great lords, and you were tenant farmers, and he could do whatever he wanted to you at whatever point. So the thought of being able to come out here and owning something of your own that no one could take away from you was willing to risk anything.
And they did risk
everything. And they did risk everything.
And they did.
Yeah. There's a history that I have written in the very early 19th century by an Italian historian of our revolution. And he opens that book with a statement of these people have done this wonderful thing. They have gone in and they have rid that land of savages. They've ridden that land of wild beasts. They've literally tamed and made a country out of this. And then the history book proceeds to chronicle all the way through that. Now, our 21st century mindset is going to look back at that and go, this is terrible. They killed all the wild animals. They killed all the people that were living here or attempted to, and so. But if I am at an event and I want to portray to you what my mindset would have been, I'm going to say this is okay. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that's
not
Frank
good.
Is saying
not
that.
even okay.
It's good.
It was a positive.
This is a good thing.
This is very positive. Yeah, that's what they thought.
So how far do you want to take the persona? Now, my persona is not going to bring that up at every opportunity, but this is in the back of my mind. And if somebody asks me, if it comes up in a conversation, then it's a very, very natural. This is how my great-grandfather would have felt. My persona's great-grandfather. This is how I feel about these things. And then it's fun sometimes to let the 21st century person stand there and go, what did he just say? But again, we're creating history, aren't we?
So the next on the list here is ethnicity, and some people might want to fold it in to some of these other, categories, but I think it does sit on the outside, whether that's whether it's nationality or actually even, smaller and bigger groups outside of just plain nationality.
There's a changeable component perhaps and an unchangeable, and I am German and English, and I can't change that. But my persona, I could easily. Well, I'm French also. I can put myself where I want to be. Mm-hmm. So my chosen ethnicity needs to carry out what is going to be consistent with the worldview of the 18th century person, which is where Parson John and his view of Maggie. I am most magnanimous to this woman that I own for the next 8 years, and I'm a picture of generosity, and I must view myself that way. I purchased her to save her life, and so, what are you going to say, Maggie?
She's giving you this look.
She's giving me this look. Yes.
I'm thinking you think too much of yourself. That's what I think. But that would be how he would think.
Wouldn't that not be how I would think?
Yeah.
So, but again, it doesn't mean that's who I am in the 21st century.
Right. You're not ashamed of that, and you never apologize. Oh, I'm
No.
sorry that I own this person. You've always said, well, of course I should, and I'm good to her. And look, I gave her clothes to wear. Why would you think this is bad of me? Even though that's not 21st century, how he would feel. But it's the same thing with being Irish. Again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. We were despised by the world. Despised. So I don't have real good feelings toward anybody else either. And I have to carry that out when I do this first person. I have to look at the people who are out there who are friends of mine, people that we go out to dinner with. And during the day when I am Maggie, I hate them. I absolutely hate them. And if it wasn't for what I was, I would have them by the throat. I'd be throwing rocks at them. But in the 21st century, we're all good friends, and we go out together or we sit around and talk.
It's that acting component.
It's
of
that acting
reenacting.
component, yeah. And that you have to portray what the person would have felt because of where they came from. And
If you
how
want
they
to try
were.
to be true to
If
it.
you want to try to be true to it, yeah.
How about personal relations? You have an interesting relationship in your personas.
With each other and with everyone else.
We have a good friend that was preparing Christmas cards one year, and he asked his wife. He said, "What's Maggie's last name? What's Carol's last name?" And she said, "Well, it's Jarboe." He said, "No, they're not married." And I took that as a great compliment because at an event we are not
married.
are not married, and because of this separation, then it gives us a great deal of freedom, and because it is reenacting,
Right.
we tend not to take these things personally too much, unless she criticizes my sermon, of course. But
Weekly.
yes,
Well, it depends on if I criticize it as Lady Caroline or as Maggie.
well, this is true.
Lady Caroline
but
criticizes everything.
our personal relationships are still consistent with our worldview, consistent with our ethnic origin, and all the things that we've discussed.
Right. Our 21st century relationship does not come into our personas
No.
at all. We leave them outside. Nor do our personas come into our 21st century relationship. And we try to do that with everyone that we meet in public, the other reenactors who are out there too. We are a persona, and that persona's way of dealing with people that are around them doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be friends with everybody. They're going to have strong opinions, pro and con. But when 5 o'clock comes, all that disappears, and we go back to being the people that we are. And that's hard for people to do. It's very hard for people to do that.
And it puts people off.
It does. It puts people off. It makes people uneasy to talk to us because they want to continue the 21st century relationship into the persona. And it's not always going to be there. And we can't always have it be there. I've been thrown out of places at events. I have had stuff thrown at me. I've had things dumped on me, which is correct for what I am. And I take no offense to that at all. But if I was past 5 o'clock and someone dumped their chamber pot over me, I might get a little bit touchy about that, particularly if it's somebody that I knew well. But that is where you're carrying your relationships. You build a separate relationship from what you have and what you've come into the event with. And some people are comfortable with that and some people are not.
One gentleman dumped the chamber pot upon Maggie, and I forthwith got in his face. And I said to him, "How dare he empty his chamber pot upon my servant and spoil the vegetables she is carrying?"
Oh, yeah.
And that line worked into Maggie's story.
Right.
But again,
But he was much more concerned with the vegetables that were needed than the fact that I got wet and dirty, as it should have been.
Right. And we, I mean, sitting here as 21st century people, we'll chuckle at that. We'll see, and the absurdity of that we find so...
Yeah, why would he have done that? Why would he do that?
And perhaps that's a wee bit of hyperbole. That's maybe a wee bit of taking it over the top. But
Sure.
I feel like you have to know when to push the envelope just a little bit to make a point.
It's harder to tell the story rapidly, subtly. You have
Right.
to
Yeah.
go
Right.
beyond subtle.
But don't go to that extreme
All the time.
Exactly.
No, there's no reason to do that.
We took a break just a little bit ago, and we're continuing this conversation. And one thing that we did not have on our list that we added was experience or circumstances that would affect our the worldview of our persona. And I, my thought goes immediately toward your story as Maggie, and her backstory that
Right.
would have affected her worldview.
Her worldview and how she looked at everything over here. That was the hardest part of the story to write, and it took really the most research, was to go back and go into that culture and go into that time and go into the what could have been and what do I want her to have experienced that she would be bringing over here with her. It's hard to make up someone else's childhood, or pre-years before you are at that particular moment in time. And but what she did, where she came from, I had to take the history of the time. I had to go into the immigration at the time. Why were people leaving? What were they running from? And what could be happening in their homeland? And I had to work that into that pre-story so that it laid down the foundation for why she was here. And I found that, though, even though it was difficult, I found that once I did that, it made the persona so much more real to me because I had a past.
Right.
I had a past. And I could think about my childhood. I could think about getting married. I could think about the children I left behind. And it made the whole story so much more real than if I had just started on this day and moved forward. So that was a good thing to do, knowing what my experiences were in Ireland before I came over here and how much love I had for the place and what I left behind. I think really that filter plays now on everything I do. I can look at children while I'm out and say, you're just about the age of my little Brenna that I left behind, and that immediately ties those people in with me, the way it would be if you were even in your 21st century going, oh, you're about the same age as my daughter. That gives you a tie and a connection. And I think that really helped make Maggie human, much more human.
Make the persona human, yeah.
Make sure to stay tuned for the second half of Session 7. I guess that's going to be Session 8. You'll see that very soon. Thanks for watching.